you'll be able to see at the ribbon at the bottom.
Yes, I do. Thank you. I want to welcome all our participants that are coming in. We will allow a few minutes for more of you to be able to connect with us before we are starting this amazing event. Thank you. Okay, as we are trying to use our time the best we can, I'm very happy to welcome you today to this webinar that will talk about gender and migration. I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us today, to thank the organizers and the co-sponsors of the this event, the Graduate School of Social Service at Fordham University, particularly the Institute for Women and Girls and the Student Congress, the Law School at Fordham University, particularly the Advocacy Project, International Advocacy Project, as well as our co-partners in this event, who are the Action for Women organization in Greece, being today with us, as well as the International Refugee Assistance Project, who has 2 representatives with us today. The topic is very momentous, I would say, and extremely important. When we are talking about forced migration, we can say that it reaches an all-time high with over 71 million people worldwide being forcefully displaced. When we're looking at the total number of refugees, about half of the refugees in the world are women. And of course, you know, many of you already think of the intersection between gender and migration as being an important aspect to discuss. So this is what we would try to focus on today, to take into consideration that this whole dimension of gender influences every aspect of migration. Why do people leave? Why do women leave? When they leave, how is their gender influencing their decisions? During the journey, how is gender exposing them to multiple risks? What are the legal implications and the legal challenges for women as they take this forced migration journey? How do they deal with gender challenges in the countries in which they arrive that become their host countries? How does gender affect their integration? And because I don't want to take too much room and rather let our event speak for itself, I want to start by introducing a very important advocate for women's rights. Gabrielle Tay, who is one of the founders of the Action for Women organization, is with us today in double capacity as the founder of the organization and as participant in the efforts behind a film that we will be screening today. So with no further ado, welcome Gabrielle, and please do introduce the film and your role.
Thank you, Marjana, and thank you to everybody, who have made this online event possible. Greetings from Athens, and without further ado, I would like to present Ime. Ime means I am in Greek. It is a short documentary of 3 women from 3 countries who have been forced to flee to safety because of gender-based violence. These women we've met in our women's space on the island of Chios, where Action for Women used to have a all-women space. And because gender-based violence is a prevalent human rights violation, which not only is domestic violence, sexual harassment, sexual exploitation and abuse, but also harmful practices like female genital mutilation, child early and forced marriages, honor killing, and trafficking. And the reason why we've made Ime is because asylum law has long failed to address the difference between women and men in terms of why and how they have experienced persecution. So this gender blindness in the establishment of refugee status and of international protection has resulted in situations where claims of women fleeing from gender-based violence have gone unrecognized. And we really hope that this documentary shines a light to the issues in the Geneva Convention. So thanks to the courage and trust of these remarkable women that we've had the honor to meet, we have this rare documentary whose aim is to shine a spotlight on the invisible war against women. And we hope that it creates a wider understanding as to why women flee their countries.
Thank you. And we are now ready to screen the film. We have 3 of which stories we were privileged enough to hear today. So I'd like to start our discussion by asking Gabrielle first, and then I'll also move to our 2 other panelists. And actually, let me step back. We have 2 other panelists, as I mentioned. One is Dr. Stephen Pellett, who is one of the founders of the International Refugee Assistance Project, and also an adjunct law professor at Yale University. He's also teaching at Fordham, and now and then. I do hope that soon in the future we will see him again at Fordham. So welcome, Stephen. And Sally Salem, who is the Humanitarian Assistance Coordinator for the same organization. And they agreed to be with us today. They have extensive experience in working on, migration, representing cases that are extremely difficult, and working internationally. So their scope is international, although more recently they took on some US-related cases as well. Very glad to have you with us today. So as I said, I will start with Gabrielle. And Gabrielle, we saw these 3 stories. We had the opportunity to, get a little bit of information about their lives. And what we noticed is they are dealing with some very extreme challenges in the migration process. How would you say that their experiences compare to the experiences of women migrants as a whole, if at all?
So I can only speak from the Greek context.
Okay.
Action for Women has been active in Greece since 2016, running safe spaces for women fleeing conflict and violence. And how do we compare each woman's experience? I wouldn't say that everybody shares the same experience. But within the Greek context, camps are dangerously overcrowded before COVID, and now it's even worse, where they're all placed on lockdown. And due to overcrowding, within the Greek context, this has forced people to erect shelters outside of camps. As recently, just within a month ago, the largest camp in Europe, Moria, was burned down. And this was all due to overcrowding, frustration. And within these areas, there are all detention hotspots on other islands, and women and girls are living alongside, unrelated to men and boys, who are, and often in tents without secure closures. So generally, women and girls have reported constantly that they feel completely unsafe due to the lack of functional locks, privacy in toilets and bathing facilities. And, some of them are even too scared to go to the bathroom at night. And, in some camps, overcrowding is so excessive that there's only one toilet for every 500 to 600 people. So, and poor lighting, frequent outbreaks of violence, and the lack of police response or assistance for security incidents create heightened risks. Unaccompanied women generally are often, exposed to sexual harassment and even sexual exploitation. There is just no safe access to secure food, shelter, water, sanitation, and this is precisely what is needed in the Greek context. And besides the basic needs, the women experience specific protection risks and have different needs to men. And we really believe that there needs to be a stronger response in protecting women and girls here within the Greek forced migration context. For example, there's a huge lack of trained female interpreters. And this creates a huge barrier for women who are fleeing gender-based violence, especially, who may be just unwilling to disclose relevant information during the interview process, nor seek any medical intervention without the presence of a female interpreter. And also, women need the opportunity and support to claim their rights and express their needs. And without access to valuable information and in female interpreters, it is virtually impossible for women to, heal, recover, and advocate for themselves. Here on the mainland in Athens, services for gender-based violence survivors are just scattered all over the city, making it extremely difficult for a survivor to access the proper care that she needs to heal. And and of particular concern for us, as rates of gender-based violence are increasing in light of COVID during the last lockdown, and now Greece currently is going on lockdown again from Saturday. There is an absence of swift referral pathways to government-run shelters, leaving women who are survivors of gender-based violence or at risk of gender-based violence with absolutely no place to go. So in short, for women here who are seeking asylum or recognized refugees, there just aren't any tailored programs in Greece which cater for their needs for protection and empowerment, because the programs to tackle the root causes of gender-based violence and advance gender equality are often very, very neglected. And the nature of forced migration is changing with conflicts such as the Syrian war that has, become increasingly prolonged. Women and girls will be trapped in limbo for years and even decades. This requires a much, much more coordinated approach between humanitarian and development actors to prioritize and resource gender-based violence and gender equality programs before enduring a crisis, just because the survivors' needs are so complex, so multi-sectorial, that it requires a holistic program for them to heal and integrate into the next chapter of their lives in the new countries.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And actually, you went a little bit ahead. I'll come back to, your discussion or attempt to start discussing the strategies that are needed, because we want to definitely get to that. But it's interesting enough how you pointed to some very serious issues, like many of them also showed in the films, such as gender-based violence, right? And then we talk about reproductive health and the reproductive rights. And we could add to that complexities of issues such as polygamy and what happens with women that are the second or third or fourth wife in the context of forced migration, as well as child marriage. Again, another major issue that affects women. So all these untold stories that are not uncovered enough and really understood enough, that are accompanying the women in their migration journey, that are important. Stephen and Sally, either of you, do you find any similarities with what you saw in the film, what Gabrielle started talking about, and the migration cases, migration, Yeah, the women migration cases that you worked with.
Thanks. And first, thanks for organizing this really important panel around this topic. And thanks to Gabrielle for working on putting together such a moving and powerful film. Sally, I'll can defer to you to talk about the situation in Lebanon where you're working day to day first, maybe.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you really everyone for this opportunity and for this movie, because it really highlights a very high important topic or a really high important issue, specifically in the Middle East. I actually can relate to all what this movie showed, and I could relate to all what Gabrielle has mentioned, and I could add to all of this, I could add that there's more challenges to be added in the Middle East, especially in Lebanon, because here in Lebanon, first of all, here in Lebanon, first of all, they are not recognized as refugees. They are recognized as displaced people, so they don't have the refugee status, so they don't have rights they don't know how, they don't have the legal rights actually, or they don't know where to ask for assistance or how to ask for assistance. And because Lebanon is a small community, small country, and it has a lot of economic situation itself, the factors all really impacting the whole refugee community as well. And referring to this, I'm referring to women who are a household by themselves for a family of probably 3, 4, or 5. So by this, they are really facing a lot of risk related to, let's say, work-related issues where they are subject to gender-based violence, or they are subject to a rape by the perpetrator. I could also relate to domestic violence if they are, a family and like they are not, the husband is unable to work because residency issues here, so they are not allowed to work. So the women, she goes out and she cleans in the houses, and she goes here and there to find job and to support the family. So this would put her also under domestic violence, because if she did not earn the money needed to support the family, that would raise a bigger issue. I could also relate to maybe to jump into another issue that I would also like to hear Steve's input on it, that after all of this, resettlement is not being an option anymore, especially within COVID-19, because with COVID-19, the refugee programs have been put in hold for now it's been a year, and they can't, so if they had the hope to be resettled to a third safe country, it's not an option anymore. So it's getting tighter and tighter, and it's getting really more tense for let's say for all, but specifically for women who are really running a family by themselves and running from a country that they've been, subject to all type of persecution or I don't know, torture, rape, or even the war. So I have a lot to add about this issue. It's it touched me personally, but I don't want to take much time of my colleagues right now. But I'm happy to jump in anytime.
Thank you, Sally. Steve.
Yeah, I want to echo, everything that Sally and Gabrielle have noted. UN Refugee Agency notes that armed conflict exacerbates gender inequality and gender inequity that is pervasive around the world. And so all the deficits in financial resources, educational gaps, the way that sexual and gender-based violence disproportionately affects women, this is further exacerbated in the context of migration. And then I'm not based in a particular country, so I don't have as close of a tie to a particular location. And thinking through the many different cases in different parts of the world that I've worked with, there's the persecution that our women and girl clients face will often also intersect with race for African refugees in parts of the Middle East or other individuals in other places, ethnicity, their religion. We work with a lot of LGBTQ individuals, and so transgender women face very particular forms of discrimination within their community and host communities. It can vary a lot depending on whether someone is in a refugee camp or in an urban refugee setting, the types of support that are available, the types of vulnerabilities that one might face, and the location of the camp. And the particular camp varies a lot. There are some camps that have relatively better support from the international community, others that are not, are sort of informal camps. One of the worst refugee camp situations right now is on the US southern border, caused by the administration's policies, where sexual and gender-based violence is a tremendous issue for using sort of basic, just being able to go to the bathroom safely can be very risky, and the risks are disproportionately targeted at women. And so things like, other things like financial means or local community support, have a very, distinct difference. And then I think later on I can talk about the sort of legal, implications that are unique to migrants.
Thank you so much. And actually, I was already preparing that question for you because, we talk about gender-based violence, and we talk about reproductive health, reproductive rights, and we talk about safety a lot. And when it comes to gender, and thank you for expanding the notion, it's not only women, it goes beyond. Gender is a fluid concept, it goes beyond women. But when it comes to gender, these aspects become extremely relevant. And Sally mentioned one important aspect, and that is recognition of status, because through the recognition of status, women and other vulnerable population can actually get access to some protection, as limited as it is. That does not exist when their status is not being recognized. So I wanted to ask you, Steve, about some of the specific legal challenges when it comes to gender in the current international laws that prevent them from accessing these protections.
Sure. And then, in terms of legal implications, there's international laws. There's also a lot of, issues in accessing sort of host country protections, a lot of access to domestic courts, and another sort of area that is also falling short is sort of international accountability for harms, that would have occurred in someone's home country and things like that. Face a lot of also challenges around like domestic or host country laws around child custody and things like that. But I think the question was most focused on sort of the international status and the shortcomings there. Neither the term sex nor gender appears in the refugee definition in the 1951 convention, as amended by the 1967 protocol, which are the sort of key international documents where refugees would seek protection. They would seek it under a domestic regime, but those are the international, where the international law has often been taken from. And so this lack of a specific protection for gender-based harms, gender-based persecution has meant that it has often been a lot harder, more difficult, and many women were unable to prove their claim. So sort of just to step back, for those who aren't familiar with refugee law, an individual who has fled from their home country and is seeking sort of international protection, so which would be sort of protection from being returned to their home country. And then there's a sort of set of rights under international law that individuals under the International Convention would be able to obtain if they were recognized with status. But all individuals who have fled from their home country, all individuals who are sort of forced international migrants, don't meet the international definition. The international definition is crafted and written in a way that does not include all individuals who have been displaced from their home country. And what the convention requires is that individuals must show that they have a well-founded fear of persecution, And so first they need to show that the harm rises to the level of persecution, and sometimes that can be a challenge. In some cases, adjudicators being dismissive of certain types of gender discrimination in countries. There's a famous case in the US context involving an Iranian seeker of protection who faced a lot of challenges in that respect. Then individuals must show that the persecution is on account of a protected characteristic. And what that means is that the persecution that they fear or that they faced has to be on account of their race, their religion, their nationality, their political opinion, or there's a catch-all category, which is membership in a particular social group. And although I referred to it as a catch-all, the courts actually sort of police in a way that often harms women and girls what types of social groups are recognized. And this varies sort of around the world depending on which court system you're in, whether you're in a US court, which is comparatively worse on some of these decisions, or in other international proceedings before the UN, which has some comparatively better guidance, or in different courts around the world. There also there's a need to show that the protected characteristic, the persecution that you have faced due to a protected characteristic, has to have happened on account of that protected characteristic. So you need to show that you possess the protected characteristic. And there's actually a question about the sort of motivations of the person who is harming you in the US context. In other parts of the world, there's a sort of a more generous view that if you face this harm, and if you wouldn't have faced it because you weren't a woman, you might be able to or you weren't part of a protected characteristic, then you might be able to show that. But in the US context, that can be a challenge, showing that sort of nexus between the persecution that you face and the protected characteristic. And then finally, there's just one more. You need to show that your state can protect you. And this can be a challenge in many instances, because many states do not protect women, but women might be afraid to go to the police, and then it might be difficult to show that to an adjudicator, particularly if the laws are on their face protective of don't condone gender-based violence, but in practice, there is no realistic protection. And so what this means is that there's a lot of evidence gathering, legal arguments that make it difficult for someone without a lawyer applying on their own to necessarily qualify. And then finally, something that Gabrielle mentioned that was important, sort of goes to your ability to obtain protection, is you have to feel safe and comfortable and be able to disclose these very traumatic events that happen to you and what you fear. And so if you're not working with an interpreter you trust, with the interpreter someone you know or from the community that you don't want to disclose this to, or if the adjudicator is someone you don't feel comfortable disclosing it to someone of a different gender, or you don't feel comfortable with them, then you might not feel comfortable articulating it, thinking that you might still receive protection, and then that might lead to a denial, which is something that we've seen. Sorry, that was a long description, but those are some of the challenges.
But thank you. This was very good, actually, because it talks to the inability, honestly, of international laws to really reconsider gender as an element of protection. And although, as you said, that catch-all group, special group category was used in some instances for, to really protect women using gender as part of that, special group. We know that particularly in the United States more recently, that was directly attacked as not being grounds for asylum. So now we talk about gender-based violence, not, being attacked in American courts when it comes to using that as grounds for, gender-based violence, asylum for gender-based violence. So that is extremely relevant and upsetting on many grounds. We do have two new global compacts, one that focuses particularly on regular migration, and even that lacks tools to fully implement protection for women. And then we have the Global Compact on Refugees that on face value, try to address some of these issues, yet we are dealing with all these legal constraints. You also mentioned another interesting aspect, the ability of women in host countries to avail themselves of protections that might be available for women in those countries because of their status or lack of status. And Sally actually talked about that as well. So I think it is important to kind of think of how do this kind of durable solution strategies that are promoted by current international bodies such as the UNHCR, how do they apply or not apply to women? You know, when we talk about migration, we're thinking, okay, one solution is to help them voluntarily return to their countries. Well, the stories that we saw talk against that, right? So how are women affected by that solution? The other one is resettlement. And I think Sally touched on the new challenges on resettlement and resettlement processes. How are women affected by that? And do we need to expand that? And of course, there's this whole concept of local integration that, again, you know, when Sally mentioned, you know, women going out of the house and then facing domestic violence, I kept thinking, oh, but they can't, if they go out of the house, they also face violence outside their homes, you know, gender-based violence, because they are exposed and there is no resort for them in terms of legal action. So how do you think these durable solutions fit migration if we start considering it through the lens of gender? This is for any of you, all of you, each of you. So whoever wants to respond. Are there any specific aspects that needs to be considered when we think of these solutions? Or do we need other strategies? What can be done to protect women in the current context?
It's really a hard question, because, you know, it's getting more difficult and difficult by time. And again, COVID-19 is not making anything easier. So basically let me start about what's being done so far. So basically, when there's a gender-based violence case, all what, let's say, UNHCR and agencies are doing is just opening a protection file, which means like providing cash assistance to, let's say, help her not to go and work out home, or let's say observing her situation over time if she's like, you know, if she was subjected to the perpetrator for more than once, or like if she's still under risk of perpetrator. Another solution could be like finding a safe shelter, which means like moving the entire family from one place to another place. To be honest, all of this, I mean, adding to resettlement also, all of this is really good solutions, but temporary. It's not changing anything at this time. There's a lot of gaps in this. And your question about like what should be done, it's really unclear, specifically if I'm going to speak about Lebanon, because I'm working in Lebanon since 2011. The economic situation of Lebanon itself is it's getting harder and harder, and you can tell. It's not like a one issue or a one problem to look at. Beside all of these issues, there's a lack of documentation. So if you also want to think about resettlement as a durable solution for this family, for this, let's say, woman, she has no documents. Sometimes she's asked to go back to the country that she left to get her documents back, or like find someone who would help her in that, and then resettlement would be eligible for her. So there's so many gaps to talk about in this domain, and there's a lot of, let's say, I can call it actually lack of resources and lack of support system, and probably one issue also to highlight too, that there's a lot of need to spread the knowledge, spread the information during the refugee community, during the, let's say, specifically the female refugee community, because when they are subjected to any kind of risk, they don't know where to ask. And this is not only because they don't know, because there's also here specifically, there's a stigma and there's shame. If like she was raped, she can't expose about what happened to her, because she will be stigmatized by her family first. than the whole community. So to be honest, it's really a very challenging question, and it's a very hard topic to discuss, and very difficult point to think of, because I mean, it seems all the solutions that are like on the table right now is not enough.
Thank you, and that's exactly why I asked the question, because there are so many gaps, and we start to start pointing to them, as you said, like providing some information, understanding the issue is a first step towards starting to address it. Gabrielle.
I think I just want to point out that there is also kind of a danger in focusing just on the vulnerability of the women and girls, as it can, just create a discourse of, victims versus, survivors. Because from my experience working with the women over the last 4.5 years, women and girls are super strong, super resilient, and they have immense, social capital and capabilities with the right support. And conversely, if we focus only on the strengths and abilities of the women, this brings the danger of ignoring the widespread challenges and discrimination and abuse, minimizing that they have all survived. I mean, the women and girls are simultaneously strong, resourceful, but they're also, marginalized. And we need to strike a balance in that when we, assess, field workers or academics or lawyers, and remember that they survive despite all these vulnerable situations which they find themselves in. And then the protection needs must be addressed equally with those of men and boys. And this involves addressing the structural vulnerabilities that is underpinned by the pervasive gender inequalities, and as well as creating opportunities for their strengths to be capitalized within humanitarian programs and despite the layers of discrimination faced, they're just not passive victims, which we hope that the message has shown through our documentary. Because we've seen also in the absence of men, the women have taken on all roles in the family, the community. The activities are undertaken by women who hold both formal but also a huge wide range of informal skills like organization, communication, and they have a huge capacity and a keen analysis of the problems that they've experienced in the camps within the urban context of potential solutions. But however, because of their minority status and the discourse of vulnerability, their capacities, skills, and abilities often go very unrecognized. And, they're very silenced by the limited access to representation at every level, from, even within receiving how we call aid, from the UN, right up to the European level that we're seeing here. And what we also need to look at is training in their leadership skills, advocacy, the information on human rights law, to enhance their participation. Because without the support, the participation of women asylum seekers and refugees in the decision-making processes can be extremely tokenistic if they're not able to, participate effectively. I'm saying this so broadly, and I understand within the Lebanese, the MENA context, and it's very different here also within the Greek context. But most importantly, the pendulum needs to swing to focus on the strengths and capabilities of these women.
Thank you.
And recognizing the barriers that create minority status, and that remembering that also vulnerability is equally dangerous.
Thank you. And thank you for really shifting the paradigm and talking about resilience and capacity and skills that we saw coming through even in the film, although, it was heavy and we saw all the challenges, but that resilience came through, and it comes through, in many of the stories of women being forced outside of their communities, women around the world, and that needs to shift. Also, thank you so much for talking about the need to really address this holistically. looking at all the aspects. Yes, there are commonalities, and we can look at global challenges and how can those be addressed, but there are some very specific aspects that can only be understood when we, again, a point that you made, that when we fully involve women, engage women in, decisions and developing strategies, which we didn't do. And they come with their lived experiences of forced migration that brings so much more knowledge. So I just want to end, before we open it to, our audience for questions, I just want to end by asking you, in the work you do, how do you see us, outsiders? I know that our audience is consists in social workers, social work students, legal representatives, law students, and the like. How do you see us able to, or how can we contribute to the work you do? Any ways in which you can see us contributing to the work we do, so that paradigm shifts.
Sorry, was that question directed to me?
It's to all of you, but you can start.
Personally, at the end of the day, we need to ask ourselves, I don't like to use the word outsiders, us versus you guys. I think everybody within who has a relation to the forced migration context, whether you are an academic or you are a social worker, field workers, anyone working who is fallen a little bit below the social net, is yes. First question, how can we change the discourse about women from minority and vulnerable to equal and capable? We can, I think, incorporate this all in our work. And how can we effectively and systematically protect women and girls generally from sexual and gender-based violence? And most importantly, a lot of us, we need to ask ourselves, how can we generate the political will within our, own governments and countries to address the needs of not just women, but, refugee women, asylum-seeking women and girls, and to unlock the contribution that they can make to provide the solutions. And how can we finally maximize strengths, capacity of women and girls to ensure their self-representation and meaningful participation, all in within our work as a social worker, as a field worker, as program managers within humanitarian sectors.
Thank you.
Of course, there are small grassroots, and so in this, especially in a time like this, instead of it's important, that we survived on private donations, and of course, help fundraise, raise awareness, speak to your friends about this. We're very happy to always, offer the screening of this documentary to raise more awareness. And because, despite, this topic, I mean, gender-based violence, it's always seen as a second-tier priority during a humanitarian response. Actually, it's only 1% of gender equality funding is going to women's organizations, by the way. And for us, that's it for me. I don't want to take up too much time.
Okay. Thank you so much. Steve, Sally.
Yeah, I think, there are ways to contribute. People should be engaged, but sort of humble about what they can do, be driven by sort of what communities needs, what organizations working with community needs. If people are developing skills or expertise, those might be helpful depending on the situation. We work with a lot of law students and lawyers who volunteer their skills in a particular context. We work with a lot of interpreters in specific contexts, and there are just a lot of ways people usually have the skills to contribute in some way, because a lot of things, from the, both, pushback against specific gender-based decisions in the US context, for instance, like the outrage over some of the, decisions to roll back protections against, for domestic violence claimants. There was a lot of, the more public outcry and sort of attention the issue gets, the better. Things like the Muslim ban or child separation, which affected refugees, but a lot of women refugees were sort of very much sort of thought about, or there were impacts not just in courts but the court of public opinion, and so things that people sharing information doesn't among their community doesn't seem like a lot, but sort of the support for refugee communities and refugee law sort of rely on sort of a general community support and acceptance. And so, there are different spectrum of different ways to contribute. So, be engaged and humble on that.
Thank you so
Sally?
much.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of this, and I would add what work in Lebanon. I think we can really. It will be helpful to increase the awareness. Always, share the awareness and help the women to be engaged more in the community and to be integrated more, because that will help them to support themselves. Even though this is a little bit challenging in Lebanon because there's a lot of political tension between the host community and the refugee community here, so they don't let anyone from the refugee community work here. So it's a little bit challenging, but this is why I'm asking that it would help if there's ways to raise the awareness, to help the engagement here more in the the productivity of the resources here. And probably the most important thing to I don't know how to rephrase this in English in a really right way, but remove the shame and the stigma of any survivor or of the the victims, because this is really the most draining factor, if I can say, because psychologically it really cause a lot of trauma, and this affect their life being. So I think this is the most important here to look at and to spread awareness about.
Thank you so much. Removing the stigma, changing the discourse, working together and being humble, because it's such a complex issue, and learning from each other are extremely important steps. So thank you so much. And now I would like to open our discussion to the audience. Hannah, you can lead that discussion. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming. Just a reminder, please use the question and answer box if you have any questions. It hasn't been very active, but I certainly have some questions of my own that I'm excited to ask. So I'll start with those. And in the meantime, just to the audience members, please feel free to go ahead, put your questions in the chat box, and we will bring them up in these last 15 minutes. So I guess to start, well, thank you so much for us all coming together. And I just think it's so great that we're able to come together, have this very important discussion from an interdisciplinary approach, right? We have a lot of lawyers here today. We have a lot of social workers here today. And I'm wondering what more specifically lawyers and social workers can be doing together to address these issues. Are there any gaps from one area of academia that could be filled by using a more interdisciplinary approach? And this question is for anybody, so feel free to anybody take the stage and answer that.
I mean, I can talk a little bit on as a lawyer working here. I think I think all of our work is better done when it's done holistically to address the sort of the needs of our clients, because there are a lot of barriers that prevent them from being able to access the sort of legal relief that they are entitled to and under the law. So I described a lot of the sort of legal barriers. One of the barriers to sort of presenting your case could be if you're suffering from PTSD or unable to present your case, and so you might need to be referred to someone for treatment. Or we've also, in the context of representing women, we've had to work a lot to help them obtain custody of their children, which often involves navigating, working with local attorneys, because I'm not a lawyer in Jordan, in Lebanon, in Iraq, and so that will often involve navigating, and then of course the shelter working. Immediate protection is often a sort of a paramount need for our clients, or simply being able to, sort of find a regular home, and as sort of a legal process, happens. And so to ignore that and to not be sort of working closely with someone who's able to refer individuals to other assistance, just means that I'm not doing a very good job as a lawyer. And often there will be things beyond my control that will, prevent my client from being able to get the legal remedy that they are entitled to. In spite of that, there's not in law school, it's a topic that's given comparatively little attention. You learn lots about how to argue minute areas of the law, which is often the specialty and why you would go to a lawyer, but not necessarily how you would as a lawyer be an effective advocate particularly for individuals who might need more social work assistance.
Thank you.
That's why we're so lucky to have Sally on our on our staff.
Thank you. Anybody else want to add to that?
If I can just chime in a little bit, stressing on the interdisciplinary, holistic approach when it comes to dealing with women, because especially women who are survivors of violence, sometimes it is extremely intimidating to reveal the facts of their case to a lawyer. Even if we have a female lawyer, even if we have a female interpreter, sometimes it gets so much to reveal their stories, and because trauma is extremely real. They forget facts, they mix up dates. It's extremely hard to extract information, and for lawyers who are prepping their cases, it's extremely different if you're practicing asylum law, corporate law. For survivors of gender-based violence, I find it really helpful to I took a course online on trauma based informed trauma, and how it affects memory, how it affects the ability to express themselves. So it doesn't hurt, I think, for us who are working with these women and providing these services, to also expand our own horizons and learn something new every day with extra information. For example, when they're having a panic attack in the middle of revealing and bring to us, and stay focused, for example.
Thank you. Sally, do you want to add anything to that, or?
No, I just wanted to encourage the idea of collaboration between the legal and the humanitarian aspects, because based on my experience, it showed a lot of, let's say, good or great results at some levels, because any legal process would take really long time. It's not like a month or two. Any legal process would take months to years. So it will be really very helpful to coordinate with the humanitarian field during this time to maintain the socioeconomic situation, to follow all the needs. Meanwhile, let's say the goal of the legal aspect, or the goal of the legal intervention, shows the results. So I think both are needed and both complete each other. So I really agree to this coordination.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. So we'll move on to the next question. So thank you everyone for, touching a little bit on COVID-19 and how that has affected, some challenges in the migration process. So I guess, can you just elaborate a little bit more on the implications of COVID-19, particularly to women migrants? And what have agencies been doing in response to this? Maybe Gabrielle, for instance, what has Action for Women been doing in response to ongoing changes from COVID-19?
So, Action for Women, we have a project that aims to respond holistically to the needs of survivors and, women, asylum seekers and refugees. So within our project, we provide skills acquisition, which is the local language, which is Greek, basic IT literacy, mental health and psychosocial support, a female psychologist, a shelter, as well as a livelihoods generation. Because down as of Saturday, we will be moving everything online. So we recognize that not everybody will have access to Wi-Fi. So we've rechanneled some of our funding to ensure that every woman will be equipped with data during the lockdown in order to continue and maintain a sense of structure during the lockdown to get lessons, as well as access to the psychologist. And also what we are also doing is like a hotline that we're able to, for them to reach out to us at a certain point in the day for any questions regarding the lockdown or the legal implications of going out, and because it's not in their language. So we'll be providing social services in that sense. Other than that, we are also looking to see what the government is doing with regards to safe shelter for women who are experiencing gender-based violence, which is compounded during, isolation and lockdown. And we will see how we can map and collaborate with the state to ensure that the women can be, there will be timely intervention should there need to be one.
To you. So Sally or Stephen, I'm wondering about IRAP and what they might have done in response to COVID-19 to assist clients during these really trying times.
Sally, do you want to start for Lebanon?
Yes. So basically, as everyone, we shifted to online system, to online interviews, and to online screening, and to even online representation, which is it's challenging a little bit because the need of access to internet, and there's a lot other challenges that I would mention in a bit. But what IRAP did basically is really providing also making sure of the internet connectivity and making sure the access of mobile devices feasible, and like it's easier for them to reach with safety concerns, to reach the stores that they can buy the data from, because it's really a concern here as well. What I would highlight what COVID-19 have done for all the community here, that is the fact of the safety and the security doing these interviews and doing these screenings through the phone in one home where let's say the perpetrator could be the husband. So in this case, we as IRAP try to make sure that the survivor or let's say the client have really her own space and have she choose the time best for her, the place best for her, that she can really talk freely without any risk could be put under this. And this would be through so many communications to make sure that she's not exposed to the husband or to any member of the family who are the perpetrators. I don't know, Steve, if you want to add anything to this so far.
I think, in terms of our clients, a lot of our clients in different parts of the world have been hurt by the economic impacts of COVID-19 and the pandemic already sort of in a difficult socioeconomic place, homelessness in some instances. We've had, for existing clients, we've been able to provide some limited funding in these instances. On the legal end, a lot of the processing for refugees abroad has shut down, already sort of strangled by the administration in terms of U.S. refugee resettlement through the refugee ban and other attempts to end essentially the refugee program that the administration has done. In terms of COVID-19 and less for a lot of our current clients, but important context in U.S. refugee protection, the administration invoked COVID-19 and a sort of public health part of law and invoked it to turn away refugees and migrants at the southern border. And the use of this provision and the way that has been used to turn away refugees and migrants, essentially all of them, is in violation of international law and has been challenged in the courts. But that's an important part of U.S. refugee law and the impact of COVID right now.
Thank you so much. As we are running out of time, I want to thank you again for the work you do and for everything you imparted with us from your experience and from your understanding of what women go through in the process of migration. I would like to leave us all with a call to action, trying to think, okay, how can we take this further? And I think the most important steps were already mentioned by our panelists. First of all, we need to keep raising awareness on the challenges that women in the process of forced migration are facing, but also raising awareness and keeping awareness high as much as we can on gender inequality and structures and systems that are participating in, maintaining gender inequality. To raise awareness, we also need to stay informed. And I would say we all need to know what is happening. It is very easy these days to become extremely tired and exhausted. And I find myself wanting to stay away from everything. Yet we need to know what is happening in order to provide the help we can, but also in order to, be able to do our part and, assume responsibility for the larger issues that affect the society. We also need to work across disciplines. And I love that each one of you mentioned how important this is, but I think even more important than just being in interdisciplinary teams is to learn from each other and expose each other to let's say as social workers, understand a little bit of the legal framework. We need to know that in order to be effective in the work we do. We will not do the work of lawyers, yet we need to understand the legal framework, understand the gaps and the challenges, so we know how to support the women we will be working with. The same with lawyers, understanding the social and cultural aspects, the contexts, that are directly related to gender is extremely important. And finally, I think it is relevant for all of us to try, if we are interested and if we are already doing this kind of work, to engage with local and international organizations and support their efforts. Now, we cannot all do the work. And, many times when we try to volunteer, we might actually increase the burden on local organizations. Not that there is no room for volunteering, but it is important to see what kind of support the organizations that are already doing the work need. Is it fundraising? Can we initiate fundraising, projects? Is it advocacy? And I think it is important to understand that now more than ever, we need to participate actively in advocacy efforts. Here we talked about reproductive health care and reproductive rights, and there are so many issues going on right now for which advocacy efforts are on the way, and we need to connect with those organizations and participate in advocacy efforts. The same with gender-based violence used as a ground for granting asylum. That's an important aspect, and whatever we can do to continue to advocate so the rights of women are being protected, and we can all participate in creating safer spaces for women migrants, is the only way in which we can start addressing the complexities of the issues presented today. So thank you very much. I hope you will follow up with us, and we will be happy to keep you connected with actions on the ground. And thank you to our panelists for being here today. And we hope we can continue to collaborate with you and support your work in the future. Thank you. Have a good day.